appreciate being invited back. It's always telling when you're repeating a presentation and folks who've heard it before don't come back. So that's an indication, I think, probably of what you have in your future. It's very flattering to be here. I remember when I was here the first time, I let the group know that I was a Rotarian for many, many years, and just have a real respect for the work that the organization does and the Rotarians around the world. And so it's very, very flattering to be on your program, and thank you, Corey, for asking that. I hope that this mouse will make the slides advance, and if they don't, I'll grab the keyboard.
Okay.
The title of the presentation is 10 mistakes that small and medium-sized entrepreneurs make. And I'll confess, this is not a scientific study. It's very anecdotal. And over the course of 15 years as an attorney, seeing some of the challenges that they had and that we had to help them get out of, 20 years as an executive, being those persons that created those challenges, being part of the people making these mistakes, and now with our current company, working directly with business owners and leadership teams who are trying to get farther faster. We get consistent challenges around the areas that we're going to talk about tonight, and my hope is that we can trigger some thinking. We can put entrepreneurs in a place where they realize that there are some predictable pitfalls, and hopefully give you some tools to think about how to handle those when and if they come up. So let's see if this advances. Yes, absolutely. So we start with this handsome devil. The 10th one that we identified that businesses typically struggle with is ignoring HR processes. And as a joke, we put here, you're hired. Donald Trump typically says you're fired. But the fact of the matter is that many businesses have virtually no discipline around their hiring, their retention, their termination, the way in which they evaluate people, the way in which they reward their employees, and the way in which they measure the effectiveness of their teams. And what we see consistently is, while there are many powerful tools and processes that business owners can use, they typically, until they get to a certain pain point, don't avail themselves of those. And so, believe it or not, this is a very consistent and challenging problem, because every single business, when it all gets down to the bottom line, is about people. It's about the people who do the work. It's about the people who buy the product or service. It's about the people who provide raw materials or components or resources to help the business run. And far too often we find that these HR disciplines are really relegated to afterthoughts. And so as we work with teams, we really encourage them to think about, what is it that this role really requires? How is it that you're going to identify people who are capable of being successful in these roles? And then what are you going to do to ensure that you identify those people, onboard them effectively, train them, teach them how to do their job, measure them effectively, and sometimes transition them if that's necessary. So that's number 10. Business owners ignore HR processes on a really consistent basis, usually until there's a problem. And it tends to be one of the barn doors that gets slammed closed after there's a challenge. The second thing that we see happen consistently is that business owners, as their businesses are evolving, obviously cash flow is important. It's expensive to hire professionals, and inevitably we find that business owners are having proactive rather than reactive relationships with their key professional service advisors. And if you look at this list here, these really are the trusted advisors that bring substantive expertise outside of the area that's typically had by the business owner. The business owner knows how to do what they do. But these areas of substantive expertise are areas that, frankly, business owners don't know anything about. They are perceived as kind of a black box. They get scared sometimes. I don't want to talk to a lawyer. That's a problem. That's expensive. My banker, what does he need to know? I'll let him know when I need money. And all of these people are folks that need to be part of the business owner's strategic team, and they need to be leveraged proactively. And so rather than waiting until there's a problem with cash flow and going to the bank, we encourage business owners to make the banker part of their strategic team and keep them apprised periodically, not only of what they're doing and what they need today, but where they're going to be going a year from now or 5 years from now, so that the banker can be part of the thinking around everything from capitalization to what the business structure needs to look like. Same with the lawyers, same with accountants. It's very, very easy to want to insulate yourself from those very expensive resources. And the fact of the matter is that most emerging businesses get exposed to these professionals usually after there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Often when there's a problem that they could have prevented had they been proactive about maintaining a relationship with these professionals. And so we consistently ask people, do you have periodic meetings with your bankers? Do you have them on a quarterly update? Do your lawyers know before you go do something? And many, many times the answer is no. Why would we need to tell them that? And the answer is, I don't know, but they do. And that's why you pay these people to help you. And so be proactive with your professional service partners and think about them as professional service partners, not just vendors, because the good ones can add value. And you should require them to. You should expect that they will. Business value to your strategic thinking. So we really encourage people to make these folks a regular part of their strategic team and proactively keep them apprised of what they're doing with their business. Okay, number 8. The first time we talked about this, we went through it a little bit quickly, and Corey asked me to spend just a few extra minutes with it this time. I'll be happy to do that. One of the things that I've done in my career is I was a national examiner for the Malcolm Baldrige quality program. It's the Malcolm Baldrige Award is the highest award given by the Department of Commerce to enterprises, and it typically recognizes both strategic and operational excellence. And one of the things that a group that has actively engaged in Baldrige will tell you is that they're engaged in continuous learning. And less sophisticated companies that many times are just trying to answer the phone and get things done that need to get done, they will develop a process, but they won't do the work necessary to consistently assess the process, determine the extent to which it's working, evaluating efficacy through performance measurements, identifying trends, and then revisiting that process to continually improve it. And so often we'll talk to a business owner and we'll say, well, what are you doing to develop this process? And they'll say, well, we've already done that. And that's great. And I don't know if you've seen this before, I certainly have. There are businesses that have processes that are old and they're outdated, and they no longer represent an effective use of the tools that are available or the resources that they have. And so what we ask people to continually think about is not just building your processes, but rebuilding your processes. Thinking about what environment existed at the time that they were first developed, what's changed, what have we learned, how are we measuring whether this is getting us the result that we want, and then consistently improving that process. And so with smaller business owners, the temptation is to put a check by the box. Okay, I wrote that system. We developed that process. And that's very, very important to develop those processes. But in the absence of organized and structured learning cycles, those processes typically don't improve. And in fact, they may not even be getting you the results that they want. So we encourage businesses to take very seriously the responsibility of organizational learning. That's one of the things that you have to get very, very good at. Okay, the next consistent challenge that we see with business owners is they don't enforce the discipline of downtime, either with their people or with themselves. And my generation grew up with this Judeo-Christian work ethic where we're going to work harder than anybody, and by doing that we're going to spend more time and we're going to outwork you, and we'll just make sure that nothing gets left undone because we're going to work all we can. And the fact is that's not a good way to manage your own time or to manage your people, or frankly, expectations. And as we see businesses emerging from that entrepreneurial stage into the second stage, into the growth stage, the business owners have to understand that if they're tired, if they're burnt out, if they're exhausted, if they haven't refreshed themselves through, as you and I were talking about a moment ago, Corey, Stephen Covey's concept of sharpening the saw, then ultimately the saw gets so dull that nothing happens. And people are the same way. We see this consistently. The business owners that are often struggling because they can't see a way out to finally have a real life. And the answer is, you can work as much as you want to. You have to enforce the discipline of stopping. We worked with a CEO whose board of directors sat and listened to him say he hadn't had a vacation in 4 years, didn't want a vacation, couldn't take a vacation, didn't feel like he could be gone. And the board of directors was very clear with him. You need to go buy an airplane ticket somewhere, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. And they understood that the CEO was no longer getting the job done at the level that the board expected him to do. And now, number one, the CEO is a real consistent advocate of vacations, and the results that they're getting are great. Another war story I'll tell you is I worked for a CEO once many years ago who was really adamant about this. He said, if you're working more than 40 hours, something's wrong. I want to know why you can't get your job done in 40 hours. And so from a cultural standpoint, he really incorporated a mindset that we want you to have a life, we want you to have a job that's been accurately described, and we want you to get it done in 40 hours because you need to have that other part of your life. When you have a boss that enforces that, that's a little easier than when you're the business owner who feels like there's never nothing to do. There's never nothing to do. And so enforcing that downtime is a discipline that they have to get good at, and a consistent lack of doing that is a gap that we see in business owners. Did that cover the questions that you had earlier? Thanks, Corey. Okay, number 6. This gets to another issue that we touched on a moment ago, and that is that often businesses that are growing have not done a very good job of establishing and measuring key performance indicators. It's not uncommon for someone to raise their hand and say, okay, I've heard that term, key performance indicators. What does that really mean? And when you work with leadership teams to develop them, you'll see that at the beginning it starts with what's our profit and what's our sale, what are our sales, and those things that tend to be backward looking and reporting as opposed to predictive. And so what we encourage business owners and leadership teams to understand is that a key performance indicator is a measurement that you can get today that will predict performance in the future. And that's much like an automobile. I assume everybody has a dashboard on their car. Well, your car is an extraordinarily complex machine. There are computers in it, there's explosions going on in any number of cylinders, there's flammable, there's just lots and lots of things going on. And it's impossible as you're hurtling down the road at 70 miles an hour to know whether each and every one of those things is working effectively. But if you look at the dashboard, you'll know, how fast am I going? How much fuel do I have? What's the temperature inside the radiator? What's my oil pressure? And all of those things are indicators that everything's okay today and will be okay in the future. And so we encourage leadership teams to think of key performance indicators as their business dashboard. That set of key data points that will consistently help you understand that yes, the right things are happening, everything's okay. 10 miles down the road, 10 years down the road, the business is going to be fine. So the challenge of not just coming up with those key performance indicators, but then consistently reporting against them and then using them as a basis to ask yourself the tough questions about what has to be done. Key performance indicators and metrics are really no more valuable than the results that they're reporting drives. And when many companies start reporting metrics and key performance indicators, they get anesthetized to the fact that, well, we set this goal and our number is much, much lower than we thought it would be, but that one's always much lower than we thought it would be, so that's not a problem. Well, when you get numb to key performance indicators, you've either chosen a bad one,
right.
it's not truly a key performance indicator, or worse yet, you're just whistling through the graveyard, and there's a problem that you're not addressing. So we see this happen consistently. Companies don't first establish them and then measure them, and then finally, I should probably update the slide, impact tactically what's happening by their assessment of those measurements. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great. Any questions out in the cyber audience? Hearing none? Okay.
And I would think that the key, at least at a company that I worked for, I would say that the key performance indicators at some level also help to drive and inform what targets would be set.
Absolutely.
For business.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, next mistake we see people making consistently is that these leaders will ignore personal blind spots. This is a screenshot from a really funny series of ads that a national insurance company used, and this character who is on the side of the car is known as Mayhem. And if you've seen this commercial, what happens is this woman's driving along and she's not bothering anybody, everything's going just fine, and she's deciding that she's going to change lanes. Well, as she changes lanes, what she didn't know is that there was a car in her blind spot. And so Mayhem here represents the blind spot, this thing that you never knew was there, and you couldn't see it because it was outside your field of vision. Business owners are the same way. Many, many times, people who start businesses are wonderful at whatever it is they do. They may be wonderful CPAs, they make wonderful cakes, they are great lawyers, they can really do the thing that is their business, but there are many things that they can't do. And those things that they can't do are their personal blind spots. And the really good business owners and CEOs are the ones who surround themselves with those people who can say, Jeff, have you thought about this? And of course it's a rhetorical question,
right,
because they know perfectly well
that
Jeff hasn't thought about that, because Jeff doesn't even know to think about it. Jeff doesn't know what he doesn't know about that issue. And business owners consistently will put people in place who are yes people, who will do what they've been told to do and who will agree with the boss. And this just creates these blind spots organizationally that will continue to plague leaders and leadership teams until they start to challenge themselves to look inside the blind spots, either by putting other people around them or getting objective input about how they're doing what they're doing. Questions? Okay. When we sometimes talk about this, anybody in the room a pilot? Anybody fly?
Bill Dendy does.
Okay, I did a little bit of flying, and as you're being trained, the trainers have this wonderful expression, and they usually tell you this expression after they've slapped you on the back of the head and realize that you're not paying attention. They'll tell you, look, I want your eyes on antennas, and I want your head on a swivel. And what that means is you can't afford to have a blind spot when you're flying this airplane. And there's a way to make sure you don't. You look around all the time and you make sure you're getting that input. So eyes on antenna, necks on swivels. That's the best way to identify those blind spots. Okay, got about 10 minutes? Great, thanks. All right, number 4. Big problem. And you'll see that I use the word tolerating. A challenge that we see consistently is that owners and leadership teams will tolerate a lack of accountability, and it's absolutely tolerating it because the owner and the leadership team drives the culture in the organization. And if you've been involved in organizations where some people feel like the weight of the world is on their shoulders because other people either can't do their job or won't do their job or won't be in a place where they are held to consequences, then what you have is an organization where there isn't accountability, which we tell people accountability is a very, very good thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy for people to think accountability is bad. It's me getting in trouble at the end of the year when it comes time for my review. I'm going to get beaten over the head with my goals. And that's what they think of as accountability. And that's just not the right way to think about it. Accountability is that cultural glue that when a team breaks from a meeting or leaves, they know they have total confidence that the other people on the team
Mm-hmm.
understand what they need to do. They're going to get it done, or if they're having a problem with it, they're going to call it out. They're going to let you know in advance, I'm having a problem. And so business owners many times will bemoan, I can't get people to do what they need to do. And what we tell them is, by and large, that's because you get exactly the behavior that you tolerate.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as you tolerate an absence of accountability, that's what you run the risk of getting. So that's number 4, tolerating a lack of accountability. I want to keep my eye on the clock here.
Okay.
Number 3, we're getting into some of the really key and consistent ones here. Poor time management. And by that, we don't mean that people don't write their appointments down on the calendar. They do. We don't mean that they don't have long lists of action items. They do. They have lots and lots and lots of action items. But when we talk about time management with leadership teams, that's usually a function not of our people busy, but are people spending their time working on the most important things. And so these long lists of things that have to get done typically are counterproductive to effective time management, because the only things that people should be focusing on are the things that are the most important, the things that will have the biggest impact on the organization. But many times you'll hear folks say, I've got too many emails, I've got too many meetings, I've got too many of these, or I can't get around to it. That's a discipline issue. And time management requires not just that you be focused on what you're doing and when you're doing it, but more importantly, that you've made the decision in advance of why you're going to be spending your time on certain things and why those are the most important things. And so that component of time management is the most interesting disconnect that we often see. These are people who are extraordinarily busy. You saw the man with his head asleep on the computer. He doesn't have time to sleep. But if you're not working on the right things, you're spinning your wheels really, really hard not to get traction and not to move ahead on those things that will make a difference in the business.
Busy versus being productive.
Yes, and we use exactly that. It doesn't matter how busy you are. It matters how effective you are. That's what made me a terrible lawyer. Lawyers bill by the hour. And so there's an inherent disincentive sometimes to be efficient. Efficiency is critical when you're running a business.
Mm-hmm.
Busy will kill you. Effective is what you should really focus your time and efforts on. Okay. Any questions? Still got a few more minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Here we're getting fun. Undisciplined sales and marketing strategies and processes. This is a fun picture of a guy who's just out telling you whatever he needs to tell you to get you to buy a car. But the fact of the matter is that as businesses mature, marketing and sales become strategic challenges. And it's very, very, very important that you think about, that you decide upon, and then you enforce the processes that you put in place for marketing and sales. Now, why do we say that's critical? Because most emerging businesses will tell, when you ask them the question, what will your sales be in 6 months? Most will say, I don't know. And those who don't will typically give you the sales pipeline that's been a reported number that comes from a sales team.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really subjective way to look at your sales. If you have a sales process, you've thought about the activities that will drive you through the necessary steps in a project that's designed to culminate in a sale. And so when we help people build sales processes, what we ask them to do is focus not on these subjective ideas from the sales team about what the pipeline is worth, but think about what your process looks like and where are you in that process with respect to different opportunities, and use that as your mechanism to really evaluate the extent to which a sale is likely or unlikely. if you haven't defined your process, if you don't know what that looks like, it's impossible to have an activity-based pipeline, and it's impossible to manage your salespeople. That's one of the most critical parts of this, is you don't want to manage your salespeople without clarity around the activities that you expect. And so it's the business owner's job to define that process and then manage an effective sales team to get it executed. So many times it's I'm out selling, you want to buy something, and the folks don't spend the time necessary to develop and then manage to their sales processes. Okay, and many people will say, what could be a bigger mistake than not getting your sales right? And there's a reason this is number 2. It's because there is a bigger problem, and it's a consistent problem, and it's one that I need to find a new slide for, because everybody always wants to know why in the heck this picture is associated with this slide. Oops, that happened twice. So here's, before you think I'm this creepy old guy, this is a screenshot from Alice in Wonderland. There's a Cheshire cat up in the corner, and the woman in the picture is Alice, and I don't know who dressed her. Some person decided that's what Alice looked like, and that's the picture I found. But I'm sometimes asked, why on earth is this the picture that you use to talk about lack of planning discipline? And we walk through the dialogue that's going on at this point in Alice in Wonderland, and it's really informing. Alice has run across the Cheshire cat up in the tree, and she's lost, and she says, would you tell me please which way I ought to go from here? And the cat responds with, well, that depends a good deal on where you want to get to. She thinks for a minute, and she said, and the cat says, well, then it doesn't really matter which way you go. And Alice thinks for a minute, and she decides that's not very satisfactory, and she says, well, but I have to get somewhere. And there's this pause, and when Alice says, well, I have to get somewhere, the Cheshire cat says, oh, you're sure to do that if you only walk long enough. And that's where the absence of planning creates consistent and regular challenges with businesses. They are walking, they're going somewhere, but they haven't done the work to decide, first of all, where am I going? Then ask the question, how am I going to get there? And then finally ask the question, what's necessary to get me between these 2 points? And so it's a great example of why planning is so critical. And many consultants will tell you strategic planning is complicated. It's not complicated. And here you have before you the 5 things that you have to do to develop and ultimately to execute against a strategic plan. You start with your vision. Number 1, what does success look like? If you use the analogy of a road trip, you have to pick a place on the map. We're going here. That's what success looks like. And so vision is articulating those. And we ask companies to first think about a 10-year plan, and then a 3-year plan, and ultimately a 1-year plan. Why? Because if you don't know what that 10-year plan is, you can't really ask yourself the question 3 years from now, am I moving that direction? Or 1 year from now, am I moving that direction? So you start with your vision. The SWOT is an abbreviation for a term you've probably heard: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. If you start with clarity around here's where I want to go, then you just ask yourself the question as a business, what are the strengths that I can leverage to help me get there? That's the S. The W, what are the weaknesses that I have to overcome if I'm going to get there? Mm-hmm. O is for opportunities. What are those things that I can take advantage of that will help me get there faster? And finally, T is for threats. What are the threats that we're going to have to mitigate between here and where we want to get? And that sort of creates the landscape of this land that you will traverse over the course of your strategic plan. If you know those things, that will inform number 3. What are your critical success factors? Mm-hmm. If you know where you want to go, and you know what you're good at, what you're not good at, what your opportunities are, and what your threats are, make some decisions about what the key things are that you've got to get done. We call those critical success factors. And what we encourage teams to do is to have in place a process not to develop 50 or 100 of them, but to develop 3 or 4.
Mhm. Yeah.
And to be very rigorous around the process of deciding what's not important. And we call those critical success factors. If you've made those decisions, what are the keys to my success? Strategies is nothing more than how will I make that happen? What will I do to ensure that that critical success factor is achieved? And then execution is the final part. We're going to go out and, if we've developed a strategy, we're going to go out and make it happen. And so from a process standpoint, the discipline of not just making decisions about where you're going, but what you're going to do between here and where you're going to get the right things accomplished is something that business owners consistently think they're too busy to do.
Mhm.
And in the absence of that, they're walking a long way without any clarity around where they're going. When you may recall, you know the answer because you've seen this presentation before, we'll ask, what is the most important part of this? And I won't have that piercing pregnant pause because Corey already knows the answer. The hardest part's execution. The easiest part of strategic planning is doing all that work. Here's where we're going to go on the roadmap. Here's our SWOT analysis. Here's the really important things. Here are the strategies. Ready, break, the huddle breaks, and everybody goes out and forgets about all that really hard work that they did to determine the plan. And so the most critical component of strategy, almost oxymoronically, because it wouldn't make sense, the most important part of strategy is tactical execution. Mm-hmm. And so that's an area where we see business owners resist the time and effort that's necessary to stop what they're doing, make those good decisions, and then impose the discipline around tactical execution. And that is the number one problem that we see. So I hope I think we're right on time here.
We are.
Good.
We are.
Thank you so much for the opportunity
Thank
to
you
be
for
here.
coming out to be with us,
A
Jim.
pleasure. I hope this made some sense.
Excellent. Excellent.